Happy Thanksgiving, Internet! So I'm back already because, like I said in the video before this, I am actually decently close to being able to wrap up this video series. So I wanted to take some time here on the holiday and be able to wrap up another one and get part 2 portraits out to you as soon as possible. So I hope you guys are back for another installment of the director's statements videos, because here we are for portraits. I realize again, kind of retroactively, that I should remind everybody that these plays are not safe for work, nor are they intended for kids. I should have said that back there with gallery. I didn't. Kind of like in part 1 where I stopped about halfway through to remind everybody. So just a reminder, as these plays progress, the subject matter is going to get a little bit more adult as the characters get a little bit more adult. So as we go on from gallery to portraits, we're going to be looking at some more tough subject matter, which brings me to my next point. I'm actually going to put this symbol up for parts of the shows where I think that the subject matter is just a little bit triggering or maybe a little bit upsetting, and someone might want to tune that out or skip through that part of the video. So if this symbol is up, just know that this is subject matter that I have deemed fairly triggering, and I am aware of the fact that some of my audience might want to avoid it. I will try to give you some sort of clue so you're not lost in the story as to what we're talking about at this point of the video, but I will also give you that warning so that you can bow out ahead of time if you would like, because I am not here to upset anybody. I want people to know what they're getting into with these shows. I always would try to put program warnings on the program as well for the plays when they were live. So just so you know, that's what's going on there. Just also reminding you guys, I did say that I'm going to put these videos out in a playlist, so stay tuned for that. It's actually already started. The videos will just come out and they will go right into that playlist. So if you want to like wait until all of these videos are out and just watch it straight through, kind of like a documentary, that option is available to you and it is in the playlists. Also, I did say that I'm going to try to pepper small announcements throughout the entirety of the video series, as opposed to having one big announcement at the end of one big video. So that is still true. So at the end of this video, there will be a couple little announcements about the channel, as well as some other things that I am planning. So stay tuned for that. With all that said, the show must go on, whether it's on YouTube or your failing IndyFringe tech run. So let's talk about portraits.
Anybody wants to see, there's a Donkey Kong kill screen coming up. Anything can happen in Donkey Kong. It's not going to get any easier.
Now, let's keep going. Let's talk about portraits, or as it was known when I first wrote it, portraits like American Gothic 7 years after gallery. Yeah, it just rolls right off the tongue, huh? All right, welcome back for portraits. So scene 1 brings us to Frank's apartment. Frank is enjoying a coffee. He's reading an art book on how to sketch trees, and you get a knock at the door. You guessed it, it's Jackson. Cue the Odd Couple theme. So in this initial scene, we find out many things. First of all is why Jackson is at Frank's doorstep, and he has been kicked out of his and Monica's apartment. So that's one of the first things we find out, is that 7 years has gone by between gallery and portraits, and that Jackson and Monica have married. We also find out that Frank is seeing someone named Scott, and we later find out that Scott is also known as Coffee Refill Guy. Remember how I told you that Coffee Refill Guy was going to be important? Well, here he is. So after we find out all that, our conversation continues, and Frank and Jackson fall into the same Frank and Jackson pattern, which is a lot of banter, a lot of quips, but also my opportunity to reintroduce them to my audience and also introduce them to people for the first time should they not have seen the gallery plays. I was lucky in the sense that most of my audience was actually already familiar with these characters, and I was able to drop into the scene so quickly because even though 7 years had actually passed between not only the scripted plays but also our fringes, Fringe does have a rather established audience that remembers works from year to year, so I did have some return patrons that knew these characters and were able to just continue the story with me. But I also had people who were seeing these people for the first time and seeing these shows for the first time, so I needed to also reintroduce who Frank and Jackson are, and not only that, but their dynamic, because this play very much hinges more so on that than even gallery. So once we do get all of the information that Frank is seeing Scott, that Jackson and Monica have married, and that 7 years have passed between gallery and portraits, the conversation continues as is custom with some classic Frank and Jackson banter. In the second part of the conversation, we are exposed to what I call just the bald cat's monologue that Jackson has early in the show, where he talks about the phenomena of time and how time kind of makes you complacent to the beauty around you. He says that he used to pine for Monica in middle school. She was the most beautiful thing in the world to him, and now that they've been married for 7 years, all he wakes up to in the morning is Dr. Evil's bald fucking cat. So that's a little bit of exposure to Jackson and Monica for the audience, as well as kind of telling us where Jackson is now that this time has passed. Frank and Jackson then proceed to discuss a little bit about where they are as artists. It is here that we find out Frank and Jackson's power has actually shifted a little bit in portraits now that this time has passed. Not only is Frank kind of struggling for work as a teacher and a professor, he is struggling for representation as an artist, and Jackson's kind of the hot household name. Jackson has a guest lecture coming up at Parsons, we find out, and we find out from Frank he's struggling to get Parsons to return his calls. Jackson tries to comfort his friend by saying, Frank, come on, you're huge in the art scene. You have pieces in museums. And this does just seem like a friend trying to encourage another friend, but do remember this little snippet and this little exchange because it's going to be very important to the end of the show. Frank actually corrects Jackson here and says, come on, Jackson, I know you're just trying to make me feel better. I don't have pieces in museums. I have one piece in one museum. That's the line that you should remember for the end of the show, that Frank has one piece in one museum.
You have pieces in museums. I'm gonna have to die before I have a piece anywhere but my own living room.
Museum.
What?
You said pieces in museums. It's one piece, one museum.
Whatever. Don't be so fucking modest. It's disgusting.
Remember that. It's important. So after the conversation starts to wind down, Frank and Jackson agree to order a pizza. Jackson's going to be crashing with Frank because he ruined his and Monica's sofa with some red paint, causing him to get kicked out of the apartment for the night. And there we end scene 1. All right, guys. So we needed to go back to our tried and true, original, genuine sponsor. The one and only, the King Cobra. Because we are at Frank's monologue, which is one of my favorite things I've ever written, and one of the hardest things I've ever written, because it was then that I kind of knew where the story was going. So, let's get into it. So something that was new with portraits was that each character was to get a monologue telling you about a memory that they have with another character in the play. This was an opportunity for the audience in this round 2 of the story to get to know each of the 4 main characters as well as we could. So the first person to start this trend is Frank, with, again, one of the hardest things I've ever written, but also one of my favorites. Frank tells the origins story of Frank and Jackson per se, as he explains how he met Jackson in undergraduate art college. Frank was walking through the quad of his school after a rather painful and heated art critique at his college, and the student that Frank just critiqued was following him out of the classroom buildings. The student jumps Frank and begins to pummel him in the quad, presumably about how harsh Frank critiqued his work. Jackson witnesses this, rushes across the quad, and tries his very best to save Frank, ending up getting punched himself in defense of a total stranger. The two are left face down on the ground together as the bully wanders off, and this is how Frank fell in love with Jackson. Scene 2 brings us back to Monica and Jackson's apartment. We can assume some time has passed between the opening of the play and now. Jackson and Monica are returning from an event at Monica and her father's gallery, showcasing the work of Richard Crocevelli, an older gentleman who paints anthropomorphic animals. Jackson, in not so many words, makes his opinion of this artist known, and him and Monica go round and round over some takeout with various quips, jokes, and banter, as is customary with these characters. This is actually a slower play than Gallery. There's a lot more long conversations and getting to know yous and sort of an idea of stagnation, which is going to become one of the central themes of this play as the most time has passed in the story at this point. From Gallery to Portraits is the longest expanse of time in which we do not see these characters on stage anywhere. It's 7 years between these two plays, whereas with Portraits and Canvas, it's only 3 years. Some other points of conversation between Jackson and Monica include the level of comfortability they have reached within their marriage, or perhaps the level of complacency, as both playfully accuse each other of flirting with other high-profile art names at the event. Monica is accused of flirting with Richard Crocevelli, the artist on display, whereas Jackson is accused of flirting with an art gallery owner who is in her 80s named Gertrude. Jackson then offers to Monica, who has just made a flippant joke of to keep such gallery noted names in her and her father's gallery, she would have sucked Richard's dick if he asked, which does indeed prompt Jackson to offer his services to do another show if need be. Obviously, he's trying to take Monica up on that withstanding offer that she just offered to Richard. Monica denies Jackson, and Jackson is a bit perturbed. Jackson and Monica also discuss that Frank has recently been let go from whatever art school he was teaching at, and that he's gained a little weight. Is Frank depressed? Monica also questions if Frank is still seeing Scott, and Jackson confirms this. Monica then playfully offers to paint a piece with Jackson to end their squabbling and do something together, and Jackson says he's tired, to which Monica accuses him of being like her father, always denying her wishes. Jackson implores her to not try her quote-unquote David Mamet shit on him, and then we also find out lastly that Monica's father has recently called the couple. Jackson questioned his wife about what this call was about, and Monica confirms to her husband that her father feels that Jackson is stuck artistically. Of course, this offends Jackson, telling Monica that both her and Frank are lusting after this old concept of Jackson, but Jackson stands before them old. This play very much is more centered again on that idea of stagnation, on this concept that everything is fine as long as these characters are provided for. But we are seeing, as we become the flies on their wall, that none of them are happy. It is then that one of the taglines of this play, something I kind of used in all the promotional materials because I just thought it was a cool quote that Jackson says comes up, in which he quotes Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher, and tells Monica, "We have art in order to not die of the truth," meaning that the truth is oftentimes very bleak, and art is the lens for which we can put on our rose-colored glasses and interpret the world how we want to see it. It's just a very morbid picture, and it's sort of this moment where you realize that the 7 years has truly passed. You get an idea for how much and how differently these characters have grown.
We have art to not die of the truth.
Friedrich Nietzsche.
I think that's the point.
Don't you think it's important that we catch up? So I have since completed my 40, and that's kind of in good time because I need to move on to something that sips a little easier so we can pick up some pace as the play starts to pick up pace. Scene 3 opens with some more time passing between scenes, assumably because we see Jackson once again asleep on Frank's sofa. Frank is entering, buttoning his shirt, getting ready for the day, and approaching the front door. In fact, Frank wakes Jackson up and tells him to get himself ready quickly. He's expecting company. And of course, the company that Frank would be expecting is Scott, or AKA to Jackson, Coffee Refill Guy. Frank is entering hastily through the living room and approaching the front door, telling Jackson, "Please get yourself together quickly. I've been expecting Scott." So Frank opens the door, expecting to be able to slide out quickly without Scott seeing that Jackson is pantsless in his apartment, but Scott bursts through and enters, and Frank is left with only being able to say, "Oh great, you're coming in." It is then that we have maybe one of the most fun bits I've ever been able to write between three characters that are just juicy and rich and witty, and something that I can't really describe without just outwardly showing you. So here's a clip.
So, more on you, Scott. Scott, who Frank likes.
What do you want to know?
I just have to know, is Frank dynamite in the sack?
I'm getting a beer at 5.
Give me one.
Fuck yourself, Jackson.
See how he talks to me? I hope he treats you better, Scott. I really do.
I appreciate you developing some concern, considering you never tip.
I'm a goddamn painter, Scott. Only tip I have is on my dick.
If you are expecting my retort there, I'm not planning on humoring you with it.
Honest. I like that, man.
So tell me, Jackson, what are your daily performances accomplishing?
Not a goddamn thing, Scott. Not even an Academy Award.
Really? You are Vivian Lee from Gone with the Wind. It's a crying shame the Academy has withheld your nod. You play the impenetrable asshole so well.
And that's just a clip of it. They go back and forth for quite a while until finally Jackson kind of has to admit his defeat in this battle of wits, and he excuses himself so that Scott and Frank can clearly spend some much needed alone time together. This leaves Frank and Scott alone to discuss whatever just happened there, and it is Frank who bursts into an anxiety-ridden monologue in attempts to justify Jackson. He proceeds to tell Scott that Jackson is one of the most creatively driven people he knows, and that Jackson is really only truly happy when he's making. He also proceeds to tell Scott that he doesn't feel it would be fair for him to ever abandon this friendship with Jackson because he feels partially responsible for Jackson's unhappiness now. He was one of the forces that pushed Jackson into more discernible jobs, into marriage, into growing up in general. How Frank puts this is he plucked the colors off a peacock. For that, he's responsible, and they are meant to be miserable together. Scott wittily returns, "Well, that may be true, Frank, but are you just miserable, or are you hungry?" Hams, because you ran out of everything else. So scene 4 brings us back to Jackson and Monica's apartment. Jackson is sitting on the sofa, absentmindedly watching some TV when Monica enters with a takeout box from a lunch that she and Frank shared alone. Jackson, of course, assumes that all conversation was about him and proceeds to question Monica about that, but she quickly sets him straight, saying that her and Frank have other things to talk about that are not just Jackson. It is then that Monica turns around and notices that Jackson is wearing his painting clothes. Yes, his clothes that are covered in paint, years of paint, because they're for painting in. And sitting on her new white sofa that we have already heard about, as this is the same sofa that Jackson just got kicked out of the apartment for staining. As the argument escalates, we start to see that this argument isn't really about a sofa at all, but rather what Jackson feels they have become. Jackson's points start being, when did things change? When did we become the people that cared about our stained sofa? He starts pointing out things in the apartment that he feels money might have been wasted on because they have just gotten too comfortable. Perhaps they're even sellouts. He points to a painting in the apartment that he states that both of them could do better, and then to an appliance in their offstage kitchenette, and he says, and that, I don't even know what that is, and Monica returns with, it's our electric tea maker, it was like $300. I was working at Tivana at the time, maybe I was a little bitter myself. Anyway, we start to see that Jackson is fearing the loss of his passion, his youth, and maybe a little bit of his edge, whereas Monica seemingly enjoys this newfound comfort and system. So as they continue to argue about the merits of sitting on their sofa or not, Jackson makes the decision of jumping on to the sofa, inviting Monica to join him. She is appalled by this behavior, saying grown men do not jump on their sofas, to which Jackson crudely replies, grown men fuck on their sofas, and he pulls his wife onto the sofa, asking her, doesn't it feel good to be bad? Monica and Jackson do share a tender moment as he apologizes for all that he is, saying, I'm sorry you married me. Maybe you and Frank belong together. After all, you guys are much less of a mess than I. He then asks Monica to dance with him on the sofa, and she politely declines and locks herself in their study. Monica is next in the portrait's lengthy monologues of memories of meeting other characters, and like Frank, her monologue is about Jackson, her now husband. And strap in, guys, this one could get a little triggering or a little bit upsetting if familial abuse bothers you. So if that's the case, tune out now. In her monologue, Monica recounts her first meeting with Jackson. Monica meets Jackson earlier than any other character in the show, even Frank, as Monica and Jackson met in middle school. Monica recounts to the audience her memories of being teacher's pet and top of the art school class in middle school, and that was only shaken when the new transfer student Jackson Bell arrived, showing much promise and much enigmatic behavior in the classroom, getting Jackson fast friends as well as fast praise from Monica and his art teacher. It was then that the young Monica developed quite a rivalry with the young Jackson and vowed to take back what is hers, which was art class. After their rivalry began, it was stunted even more quickly when Monica notices that Jackson has been noticeably absent from school, and this goes on for a couple weeks. When Jackson returns, his arm is in a cast, and Monica does not really have a chance to speak to him until after school. Monica approaches Jackson and asks, "How did you break your arm?" The young Jackson smirks and says, "I didn't break it." And it is then that Monica tells the audience that was the smile that sunk her, because they went from being rivals to fast friends, and they just always have been friends the rest of their lives. She concludes the speech by saying that it wasn't until their wedding night that she found out how the young Jackson had broken his arm and why he was absent from class. Apparently, Jackson's father broke his arm, but Jackson reports he was always kind of glad that he did because Monica talked to him. Scene 5 returns us to Frank's apartment and Jackson once again sleeping over on the sofa, only this time it's not Frank who walks through and wakes him up, it's Scott coming from Frank's bedroom. Scott ends up playfully waking Jackson, and once Jackson comes to a bit, he ends up asking, "What color did you paint the sofa this time?" asking Jackson for some sort of explanation as to why he is back at Frank's place rather than his own home. Jackson begins to sleepily confide in Scott about the continuation of the sofa argument, telling Scott about how he was left dancing alone when Monica rejected him after he tried to make his point about what they're becoming as a married couple and how they are perhaps growing apart. After this sudden bout of seriousness from Jackson, Scott ends up comforting Jackson, and it's just then, unbeknownst to both Scott and Jackson, Frank is walking into the room, but decides to stay in the doorway and eavesdrop a bit over this conversation between Jackson and Scott. In comforting Jackson, Scott tells him that he witnessed a gay man, Frank, talk through fondue the other day just about Jackson. So he has to be doing something right. Frank surely loves him. A little embarrassed about this, Jackson tries to change the subject a bit and asks Scott how much he really cares about Frank, asking him, "You really give a shit about Frank, yes?" Essentially asking if Scott has real feelings or is in love with Frank. Much to Jackson's satisfaction, Scott returns with, "I give a couple of shits, yes." So Jackson is satisfied with this and states that Scott is lucky to have Frank and Frank is lucky to have Scott. Scott gives in a little bit and tells Jackson, and Frank is lucky to have him as well. Jackson then begins to speak on how much he admires Frank's work, but through this you start to see how much Jackson just admires Frank. All of this Frank is overhearing from the doorway. In this conversation, Jackson talks about Frank's paintings and how his use of shadow always has boggled his mind, that Frank can paint a simple piece of tchotchkes on a shelf, and yet the shadows in the works mean something. He ends this by saying someone should really tell Frank he's a genius. Scott's a little bit moved by this and realizes that Frank and Jackson are probably not the kind of friends that are going to tell each other, so he confides in Jackson something that Frank was telling him over lunch. Scott tells Jackson that Frank stated that he says that Jackson can put more life and momentum in a piece than any artist living today, and that that's something he wishes he could do. After hearing all this, Frank retreats back into his bedroom, and then Jackson makes the crude joke of, "Hey Scott, just don't fuck while I'm here," and Scott says, "Well, I wouldn't dream of it, but how long are you going to be here?" This is really the first time that you see these two characters, Scott and Jackson, starting to establish their friendship and their dynamic outside of Frank. And I had a really great time writing this, and it's a theme that I very much carry over into Canvas. So this is sort of the establishing of Scott and Jackson as friends. Scene 6 opens us back at Frank's apartment. Everyone is awake this time, but we should still have an impression that it's fairly early in the day. The three guys, Frank, Jackson, and Scott, are lounging about in some semblant of pajamas and playing what is known in the galleryverse as the Hoarder's drinking game. It's just a thing Frank and Jackson do as friends. They have a drinking game they've established to hoarders that they play on Sundays when they get together, and we have the impression that it's something that's been going on a very long time throughout their friendship. This is a charming little morning scene that shows us Scott and Jackson starting to bond, but we do get the idea that things are a bit tense because Jackson has been there a while. Because of this, Frank and Scott inform Jackson that he will be the one to order and pay for lunch, bringing back the joke from the previous scene that if no one is fucking at Frank's house while Jackson is there, he has certainly outlived his welcome. Scott and Frank request Chinese from Jackson, and as he's about to order the food for everyone, Monica enters and needs to talk to Jackson. The tone in the room suddenly goes deadly serious, and Jackson is actually refusing to go talk to Monica privately, arguing that Frank's as good as private, and he's been on Frank and Scott's sofa now for a while, so anything that she has to say to him can be said in front of them. As Monica and Jackson continue to argue, things devolve into arguing about everything that's happened the past few weeks. Jackson finally brings up that he even had to go to a showing meeting for his artwork in dirty clothes because his wife wouldn't let him back inside his own home. It's then that a sort of famous galleryverse bit happens when Frank cuts him off mid-argument with his wife and says, "You know I have a washer, Jack," and Jackson replies, "I'll just show you."
I had to go to a fucking showing meeting in dirty clothes because you wouldn't let me into my own house. So please, whatever you have to privately say to me, say it now because shit's already awkward as shit.
I have a washer, Jack.
I don't know how to use it, Frank.
As the laughter of that joke dies down, Monica's confession pierces through the scene with, "I slept with Richard." Scott leans into Frank asking, "Who's Richard?" Perhaps reminding the audience as well that we already have mentioned Richard because it's, Richard Crocevelli, the artist that Monica was accused of flirting with at Jackson and Monica's last gallery event. Jackson says that he had a hunch, and with that, Monica announces, well, there was that then, and makes her exit. Without thinking, in the heat of a moment, Frank offers Jackson a place to stay indefinitely. All right. So scene 7 was the one that stumped me, as I could legitimately not remember what happened in scene 7 of Portraits. I remembered scene 8. I remembered the last two concluding scenes of the show, but I could not remember this scene, nor did I remember writing it. So I had to go back into my files and rewatch this scene to remind myself what happened. And upon doing that, I actually found this scene to be a really nice moment of development in both Frank and Jackson as characters that I think really does set Portraits apart as the play that deals the most with sort of that quiet, stagnant desperation that both Frank and Jackson are feeling in their middle life. So with all of that said, you might have noticed that I don't have a ton of footage of gallery. I am tending to use a lot of my footage from portraits and canvas because the production company that I run, Catalyst, is just a little bit further along now. We have the equipment to record our shows, or we have the manpower or connections to get that done for us, whereas in our formative years when gallery premiered, I just didn't have that. I think it sort of worked out for the best though, because I am able to talk my way through something a lot more plot heavy like gallery is, whereas with portraits and canvas, they're a little bit more talky, they're a little bit more adult. So describing what happens in a conversation is a little bit more difficult than just showing you the conversation. I think with these videos, I want to try to harbor in on self-critique as well as being able to self-analyze a little bit. And so since this scene was so forgettable for me, but I actually found it to be a sort of unsung gem of the series, I wanted to go ahead and play scene 7 of Portraits for you. So in scene 7, we will find ourselves back in Frank's apartment. Jackson is staying over, and it's assumably about the middle of the day, and off stage we can hear Frank and Scott arguing. Jackson gets a nice moment with the audience when he mumbles, "I wonder who they're talking about," to himself, and then Scott enters the living room.
What? You know, you've got a really good friend in there. I mean, really good, like creepy good.
Yeah, we get that a lot. Hey, listen,
No,
man.
you know what? No more listening to you. Good luck, Jackie.
Please don't slam the door.
You all right? Right.
What do you want? Thai or pizza?
Frank.
Jackson, I'm hungry. What do you want?
Thai?
Wonderful. Number 12, no onion, right?
Right. Frank,
What? You want pizza now?
I want to tell you something.
Oh, great. Another heart to heart. That's what I need more of today. Just not pad thai, just heart to hearts. Shoot.
I think your painting is brilliant. I think you're brilliant.
Okay, I don't need you to patronize me because my boyfriend just stormed.
I thought you weren't subscribing to any
Okay,
titles.
just don't patronize me.
I'm not. I was telling someone the other day that the shadows on your piece with the tchotchkes, they're amazing. I could never do that. I tried once, but I just thought someone should tell you that the shadows on that piece are really great. You should paint more.
What in the hell, Chad?
What?
You and this whole talking thing doesn't suit you. Put you up to it. Did Scott tell you I need an ear?
No, I just thought that.
Thought
maybe
that what? That I needed you?
Maybe. I
I
don't
don't
know.
need you, Jackson. You need me. You need my couch. You need my phone. You need me to tell you how a washer works. I don't need you. I needed a companion. I needed a life. I needed to get laid. But it's never in the cards, is it, Jack? I fucking married you, didn't I? I married you. We all know I can't fuck you. Monica got out and I'm stuck. I'm not getting laid or getting noodles because I'm fucking stuck.
Let's go to a gay bar.
I'm not going
Aren't
to a
you
gay
nice
bar
little
with you.
twink? You can wear those tight jeans I
I'm not
got
wearing
you.
tight jeans to the gay bar with you.
Look like a young Eric McCormick.
Who? Damn it, Jackson, stop.
Maybe get me drunk in there?
And we're joking about it. You know what? I'll be back later.
Sure.
I overheard the whole fucking thing last week.
Fuck, Frank.
And with that, Frank makes his exit. I hope you see what I mean by that scene being a little bit forgettable in the context of talking about the play's plot. As far as the plot goes, that scene doesn't really move us very far along in the story. It just gives me the opportunity to show Scott choosing to sort of exit the relationship with Frank at that time, and then gives me the opportunity to allow Jackson to try to reach out to Frank by coming clean about that conversation that he had with Scott about Frank's art. It was just sort of a surprising little gem that I found that's just really a conversation and further exemplifies that idea that Portraits is more talky and more stagnant in the universe rather than Gallery that is more plot heavy and I guess you could say action packed in comparison. So next after that short scene, we get Scott's monologue. And Scott's monologue's a little bit of a unique situation because Scott is the only character that is not going to be talking about a specific memory of meeting one other character in the show, but rather his viewpoint of Frank and Jackson as a unit. Scott's monologue opens with him telling the audience that he is consistent for putting himself into situations where the acceptance comes hard, be that in the dance scene or in relationships. He then describes to us that although he's always hated the fact that his adorable and clearly gay, yes, bringing back that old joke that everyone knows from Gallery, but even though that he hates the fact that his adorable, clearly gay regular never came to the diner alone, he also found it pretty sweet. He describes Frank and Jackson's bond as unshakably permanent, telling us that Frank is a sewer. For every time Jackson shows up like a broken rag doll with an arm missing or a tear, Frank would be there to put him back together and send his creation out into the world better than it had come into the diner for yet another lunch. He also tells us that over the years he left his number on napkins for Frank many times, hoping that Frank would maybe call him and need an ear himself. And Frank finally does. Scott describes the night that Frank calls as him calling late and drunk, and we find out that in the timeline of Gallery, this night would have been the night that Frank confessed his feelings to Jackson and ultimately saw Jackson get the girl. So a distraught Frank reaches out to coffee refill guy or Scott, and that was sort of their first meeting up at the bar. Scott tells us he knew what was going on there as Frank consistently was repeating the same kind of toxic sentence that nobody gets him being Jackson like I do. Repeating, nobody gets him like I do. And it was Scott's fear that Frank defines the I in that sentence with that toxic idea, that he is defined by the fact that he gets Jackson. Scott then also says one of my favorite lines in the show, or really the whole trilogy, wherein he says Frank sees himself as the cereal box decoder ring and Jackson as the code. He concludes by telling us that that night he happily auditioned to be Frank's Jackson stand-in, but unlike Jackson, the broken toy that Frank would repair, he fears that Frank will not repair him. He's in danger of breaking from months and months of being second and ignored, and Frank hasn't really seemed to notice. All right, look. Scene 8 is going to be kind of a wild ride. Not only is Scene 8 the climax of Portraits, if Portraits truly has a climax, but it's also, I'd say, probably the second worst on-stage fight that Frank and Jackson are going to get into over this 10 years. So we're back to our original sponsorship, and we still have some play to cover here. Let's strap in for Scene 8. It's gonna get a little intense. Scene 8 covers a lot of ground. We open with Frank on the phone and Jackson entering quickly with some papers in hand and says, "Look, Frank, birthday divorce papers." I think it's pretty obvious that Monica and Jackson are divorcing. Frank is trying to finish up his obviously important phone call, and just then we hear him drop the name Martin, who we know is, of course, Frank's troublesome brother that Jackson hates. So Jackson exits himself into the kitchen to barge in on Frank's beer stash, and Frank is left to finish his conversation that we didn't find out is with his father. Jackson overhears that Frank will be taking over some of Martin's spreads for June in the magazine that Frank's family runs. And this utterly offends Jackson, as it is a sports magazine that Frank's father and brother runs, and June is the bikini body countdown. So Jackson makes the witty retort of, "Frank, what are you doing spreading bikini bodies?" Frank admits that he's frankly bored. And Jackson starts to reveal how drunk he is at this time and tries to console his friend, but it goes rather poorly. Here we come to the point of the semi-famous Buzz Lightyear speech of portraits that I am just going to resort to my footage to show you.
Because art destroys you, and I do not have time for us both to be destroyed. Happy birthday, by the way. What are you this year? Still 29?
I'm 34.
You're 35.
Either way, you think I'm destroyed?
Well, you're a wreck and you don't know who you are anymore, so...
Fuck, dude. Way to lighten the mood.
You barge in here wielding divorce papers and blame me for killing the mood? People don't want the next great artist anymore, Jackson. They want the next Grand Theft Auto.
I can't believe that. Somewhere, probably not in America, but somewhere there's a kid who's reading about Picasso who sucks at video games.
Not so sure about that.
It's not like I ever thought I was going to be the next Picasso, Van Gogh, Warhol. I didn't. But I have to believe someone gives a shit.
That's nice.
Frank. I never expected you to fly.
What?
No one did. What's the thing with modern art? You can't fly anymore. You just gotta be a toy. Falling. But always with style.
Oh, Lord.
Get falling, brother. Just put some finesse in your descent. Can't have you giving up on me. You're better than that. Besides, we'll always have each other.
Oh, God, I hope not. Oh, I hope I reserve myself the dignity for suicide before I'm setting opposite you in the sunroom of a home.
But Frank, I love you.
You shouldn't lead people on, Jackson. It's rude and unbecoming. Let go of my hand.
It's then that Jackson breaks the conversation by asking Frank, "Is this what we had in mind? And what should I do, Frank? Should I sign these papers?" At this point, we see that Frank is getting a little bit frustrated with Jackson's neediness here, and he retorts rather flippantly and quickly with, "I don't know, Jackson. It's your life, and in this case, your wife. I can't make all your decisions for you." Jackson continues to press Frank and continues this neediness with Frank, and it is then that Frank loses all mask and loses all ability to be able to put on a brave face with Jackson, and he stops him saying, "Me too, Jackson. I want a divorce." Now, I think this is going to be another time that I rely on the footage that I do have from portraits, because I feel like in this argument, it is one of the worst arguments that we see Frank and Jackson get into. But not only that, you can see the entirety of the 7 years that did happen between gallery and portraits coming back up for these characters. I've always felt that after gallery and after Frank's feelings were revealed, that they sort of kept that hidden and buried within their friendship. We talked about it, it didn't work out, and they suppressed it. And in this fight, I really did want to link those two plays and the longevity of the weight of those years onto these characters by allowing them to have this argument as publicly as they should. They are play characters after all. So in this scene, I was hoping to sort of capture the weight and longevity of Frank and Jackson's friendship around this painful event of Jackson and Monica's divorce. I hope you see now why I went back to our original sponsor of King Cobra 40s, because this scene is just kind of hard to watch. So I guess I can say with a somewhat heavy heart, enjoy the rest of scene 8 from Portraits.
You are how I got here. You.
What?
I want a divorce.
Oh! You too?
Yeah, Jack, me too.
Could have given me some time between divorces? It's my fucking
Don't you
birthday, Frank.
fucking do. Don't you make me out to be the bad friend. I was never anything but the best friend to you, above and beyond, Jackson. People think I'm insane. They don't get it. They don't get you. It's exhausting. You're so exhausting.
Exhausting? Let me tell you something about exhausting, Frank. Exhausting is feeling bad every day for not taking dick. Exhausting is feeling bad for being married. Exhausting is feeling bad for being single. It's every time you give me that look, we both know exactly what it means. It means I have to feel bad for not sucking you off. That's fucking exhausting.
You're an asshole, Jack. I didn't ask.
I didn't
You didn't ask for what?
I didn't ask for you to love me. But let's be honest. It's because I have such a great ass, isn't it?
Okay, guys, but fun backstage little story. That rain sound cue effect is not a sound cue at all. It was literally raining and storming that hard that day at IndyFringe, and it just so happened to time with the first time that Frank punches Jackson. So the theater and playwriting gods were smiling on me that fringe. And after all of that, Jackson is left with nothing to do other than gather his divorce papers and leave, and Frank is left alone as the scene blacks out. Alright, so next up we have Jackson's monologue in Portraits, and full disclosure here, if I am to use these videos for a bit of self-reflection as well as some arts education for myself, this is probably one of the only elements of the show that has been produced and realized on stage twice that I am considering cutting from the final version of the show. Yes, I'm aware that the book is already published, but I am considering cutting this scene not only because it feels oddly placed in Portraits, but also because Jackson actually has 2 monologues of this effect in Canvas, and I think it might be a stronger choice for the character to allow him to speak his points only in the final production. With all that still being said, Jackson's monologue still does hold quite a bit of weight within the story. Jackson tells us about a time that he was trying to earn Frank's friendship. Frank and Jackson obviously went to art school with Monica, and Jackson and Frank got to know each other through this, and one of Frank's favorite painters was coming through the college of Jackson and Frank to give a prestigious guest lecture. Problem is that the tickets to the Mark Tansey art lecture were instantly sold out amongst the student body, while Frank was helping Jackson complete his final for Advanced Studio Arts 1, which is painting class for the layman. Jackson felt awful that his friend had missed his opportunity to buy tickets to this lecture he so wanted to see because of him, and he made it a mission to score Frank some tickets to Mark Tansey. Jackson did everything he possibly could until he locates tickets in the hands of a girl in his class that she's got a crush on him. She just, according to Jackson, has a unibrow that does not work in the same way that Frida Kahlo's unibrow might have worked. So Jackson decides to flirt his way into these tickets, and the story proceeds in a way where we can assume that Jackson might have lost his V card to Nancy Gladstone, an unattractive studio art major who liked him, in exchange for Mark Tansey tickets to help Frank out. Jackson then tells us that at a lunch in which he was going to reveal his tickets to Frank for Mark Tansey, Frank informs him that Monica actually scored him a couple of tickets as she was head of several student body organizations, and suddenly Jackson's take for the team became meaningless, and he never told Frank about this, and he never told Monica about this, and it's just always something that's kind of weighed on him. Because he understands that it's easy for his friends to mock him and to make a joke of him. He says it's easier to hate him than to truly love him. And I think that this is really my first attempt at making Jackson self-aware and threadbare before an audience, but because it came in the context of this sort of flashbacky story that we don't get any sort of anchor within the universe as the other characters' monologues do, it just does not hit as hard as I would like it to for Jackson, and that's really why I'm considering removing this piece and allowing Jackson's monologues to really stand as they do in Canvas. Portraits also just runs a little bit long, so that's just an idea I have for full disclosure, and that is the end of Scene 8.
Okay, progress report.
There we go. Can you guys see that? Yeah. We're at the end, which is pretty good timing because we're at the end of the play as well. This is the final scene of Portraits. And in this, we get that some time has passed because we are lights up on a completely new location for the show. We're at an art gallery and we see Jackson sitting alone on a painted sofa reading a review in a newspaper. It's just then that Scott enters. And hey, let's be honest, I have footage to show you the end of this play, so I might as well just do that. Catch me at the end of Portraits for me to remind you to subscribe and give you an endorsement or two.
So they really didn't get this one, huh, Jackie?
A confusing and offensive step back into old habits, Jackson Bell never fails to disappoint as an artist.
Ouch.
In asking his audience to take part in interacting with painted sofas, Bell has gone a step farther from disappointing us and has flat out insulted his audience by asking them to join his miserable, lonely, and self-centered existence. Someone asks you to attend this tragic display by Bell? Politely decline and enjoy the sofa in your own home.
It's beautiful. You should have it framed.
Fuck you.
So they didn't get it.
This was the nicer review. Nouveau fucking hated it. My career is over.
It's not.
Scott,
You may never paint in this town again, darling.
I'll have to move. I don't know how to do anything else.
Means you might be an actual artist.
You know? I might be. How the fuck are you, Scott?
Tremendously, horrendously miserable. And how about you? How's the single life treating you?
I've gained 10 pounds in takeout, and I fear I'm beginning to smell.
Well, you look like shit.
Thanks. You didn't.
No, I didn't. I didn't even try.
4 months on my own, and I've managed to destroy my reputation as an artist. Completely.
I'm surprised it only took you 4 months.
2. 2 in 1 year, Scott.
At least you still have your ass.
You're alright. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. I couldn't miss the world's most hated season.
Here she is.
Did she?
Of course she did.
You know, Jackson, there's a certain art to live in. Sometimes, maybe it's just that your aesthetics are changing.
I should tuck you in my pocket. You'd be my fabulous little Jiminy Cricket.
You know, unlike some other people, I have no interest in being your pocket fag. Well, look at that. I sprinkle some fairy dust and bring you a Christmas miracle.
It's August, Scott. Well, you look like shit.
You should fix him.
Oh?
Look at it. The composition's all off.
He's getting fat.
Alright.
have my number.
I love you.
Oh, okay.
Wow, I hope no one heard that. Dies here.
It's dead.
I don't even know what we're talking about because it's already dead.
You do look like shit.
So do you.
So, how's it going?
Sometimes I don't eat, others I barely sleep, so better.
I know what you mean.
Do you know?
Do what?
Love you. Just not.
I know. I know. I like it.
You do?
Yeah. It's loud and obnoxious and oversaturated. It is undeniably yours.
Nuvo should have asked you for some jazz.
He did. It's honest.
No reason not to be. Sofas. I feel like that's all my life has become is sofas.
Year of the sofa.
That is better.
What did you call it? Sorry.
It was like I forgot how to paint. When I got home, nothing on canvas worked, and all I had left was this fucking stupid sofa with a tiny red stain on it. I couldn't help but think that nothing in my apartment, nothing in my life was ever meant to be so goddamn white.
God, no white stains. Glad I saw it.
Last night really fucking made me wait, you diva.
No, I just wanted to be sure.
I know. Frank, will you apologize to me for punching me in the face on my birthday, the day of my divorce?
Never.
Lunch?
I'm buying.
I'm ruined.
Come on. She never.
She never. Let's just get the fuck out of here.
We're going somewhere dark, like the beer tent. Hey, got something to show you. A piece I'm working on.
You painted something?
I didn't want to just give up.
Good. Hey. That one was our sofa.
You're an asshole, Jen.
And the show concludes with Monica entering behind the guys just missing them, noticing that it is her and Jackson's former sofa, and standing on the sofa to honor that memory we have from the beginning of the play, in which Jackson asks her to do just that. Now, Portraits is interesting because it was the only play where I knew that this was going to be a serialized piece of theater. Now, I feel like Gallery has a hard end because I was unsure that Portraits was going to be coming. I had yet to have the idea to sequel these shows. So I feel like Gallery could be the end of the story, whereas with Portraits, I feel it's left much more on a purposeful cliffhanger because it was at this time that I knew it was a triptych play. And finally, that brings us back to Canvas, the focal point within the art piece that we are talking about today, the trilogy, the Gallery trilogy. I realize now that I probably picked a very strange first play to talk about for the director's statement videos, because Canvas sits at the end of a trilogy of plays. To talk about how Canvas is different in the trilogy, you kind of need to talk about the other two, and to talk about, you know, what sets Canvas apart or what makes Canvas special, you also still need to talk about the other two. So not only is this video done in 2 parts, but it's a little bit longer, but hey, you live and you learn, and let's be honest, nobody's on the internet to watch anyone succeed, so. All right, and that's where I'm gonna cut us off today with Portraits. Now, I hope everybody's having a safe and happy Thanksgiving and a happy holiday season. These videos have been kind of nostalgic and both fun and difficult to make because obviously this trilogy is a play about friends that I do with my friends. Like you heard in that last scene, we're talking about Nouveau, which is one of our local reviewing theater papers that doesn't like us very much, obviously, hence why we make quips. And we mentioned the Fringe beer tent and stuff like that that is integral to my circle of friends and works into the plays just because we are all so close. So in this time where we cannot see each other, I am enjoying trying to learn and trying to make videos and create content that's kind of bringing us together in the same way that some of these plays and some of these theater festivals that we like to participate in would do. I hope you're enjoying the video. So now you know Tortilla will be coming next, and after Tortilla we're going to be able to get into some of my more one-shot plays. So that will be plays like The Solidarity, Hell's Fourth Ring, The Mall Musical, Q, one of my problem plays, and yes, we're gonna do it. We'll talk about the Donkey Kong show Arcade Fire. So if you're liking these videos, please leave a comment, leave your thoughts, even you consistent disliker, and we'll catch you backstage for the conclusion of this video series with Canvas and the final piece of the summary videos. Catch you backstage, internet. Also, look at my sweater.